Hello everyone, my name is Sulaiman and today I'll be talking about colonialism. I wanted to talk about gender roles and social change since we've discussed a lot about it in class. However, I realized that we all need an extensive amount of reading before we are ready to talk about it in a civil manner. Ever since we've discussed colonialism, I've been reading about it and I think it is important to understand how it affects us and contributes to the social, political, and economic unrest in the world. We are going to have a brief introduction and try to understand the reasons and ways in which colonization occurs. We'll look at a little bit of colonial history and then we are going to try and understand how colonialism has changed the world. Let's say I come to your house uninvited, stay without permission, force you to give me your money, and eventually kick you out of your own house. This is an example of colonization. Colonialism is an act of creating a mini version of your own country on a foreign land or settlement. Remember when I wanted to stay in your house and you wouldn't let me? Well, this time I have a gun. The use of force for invasion is called imperialism and it is often the first step towards colonization. Countries would colonize lands for gold, cod, and glory. They'd convert the locals to their religion, steal their wealth, and brag about the number of areas they'd captured. They'd colonize countries that were on the brink of destruction and needed financial support. These colonies were called protectorates and were built on the notion of providing protection. An example of this was the colonization of Egypt. In terms of resource allocation, they sent innocent trade minions. Some of them even came looking for spices and silk. Sounds familiar, right? Before the subcontinent, they had years of practice in colonizing Africa. They also created settler colonies in Canada, Australia, and other parts of the world. Underlying all these reasons was the hidden agenda for economic dominance. It is important to understand that when we talk about colonialism, it wasn't just the British who were running around the world capturing territories and continents. The European Empire consisted of countries like Spain, Portugal, and France, who had their own share in colonizing different parts of the world. Even America, which was once colonized by Spain and England, captured Vietnam and Hawaii. The colonization of Africa started as early as the 15th century, which resulted in the famous transatlantic slave trade. It is estimated that around 10 to 12 million Africans were enslaved and taken to different European countries, where they were subjected to torture beyond imagination. By the early 20th century, Africa looked like a patchwork quilt. It was divided into different colonies, and every colony obeyed the country that captured them, which created a massive political unrest throughout the continent. One must ask themselves, why Africa? Because in terms of natural resources, Africa was filthy rich. If subcontinent was Jeff Bezos, who is the world's richest person, Africa was Warren Buffett. In the 17th century, the East India Company was formed, and we all know what happened afterwards. They changed how things worked in the subcontinent, and pretty soon everyone was angry at these rich dominions. This turmoil erupted as the World Wars. By the end of the Second World War, the European Empire had lost its footing and was gradually losing its power. After the formation of the United Nations in 1945, around 80 colonies gained independence. 2 years later, the subcontinent was decolonized, resulting in the formation of India and Pakistan. To add insult to injury, the British gave the former colonies a new name, the Commonwealth countries. It is important to realize that this wealth wasn't common at all and it belonged to the countries that were once colonized. The refusal to accept this label gave rise to an entirely new era of post colonialism. Today, we live in a post colonial world which has a new invisible form of colonialism called the neo colonialism. The term was coined in 1965 by Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, who explained that a new subtle type of colonialism uses economic subjugation to control developing countries. Neocolonialism or new colonialism works by the exploitation of poor countries at the hands of economic giants and multinational corporations. In one way or another, Africa was still colonized by wealthy countries, which were hell bent on leeching it dry. Take IMF for example. In lieu of financial loans to the country, the IMF severely limits the expenditure of the money on African development. which means that the cap of spending money on healthcare and education is extremely low. If Africa refuses to abide by these terms, the wealthy bullies would place economic and trade sanctions, isolating the country from the rest of the world. The same is the case with Franc Afrique, a name given to the countries that were once colonized by France. Locked in a strange pathological relationship, France still exerts control over these areas by controlling the economic policies of these countries and by the induction of pro France governments. It also keeps a percentage of the resources produced by these countries. Similarly, China uses African soil to generate money for its economy by setting up factories and using African people as a source of cheap labor. It has been argued that colonialism is the real reason behind countries lacking development today. Colonialism resulted in the creation of racism and the endorsement of white supremacy, which is a belief that the white are superior to any other race. African slaves were forced to work without pay, tortured for the entertainment of the white people, and put up in cages for public display. Most of them died due to starvation or injury from some sort of trauma. The African race has faced years of human rights atrocities while the world turned a blind eye towards their suffering. But Africa isn't the only country that's facing the aftermath of colonization. Look around us, we've all been colonized. The removal of our language and cultural identity was yet another way to colonize us. The British did this by enforcing English as the official state language and creating institutions that taught English throughout the world. Today, English is the official language of 67 countries and 27 non sovereign states. Losing a language results in the loss of one's identity because language is a primary means to understand the world around us. To change a person's view of the world requires a change in their ideology, and in order to create a new ideology, one needs to change the medium of their learning. Lord Macaulay, the person responsible for English education during the British Raj, please pay attention to his words, wanted to create a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and intellect. Today, we take pride in speaking the language of the people that once imprisoned our ancestors. Even the way that I'm speaking right now is an indirect result of the colonization of my ancestors. We want to dress like them, talk like them, even think like them. This cultural hegemony is the result of our brainwashing over the years. We've been made to believe that the way we live our lives is not right. We are made to feel uncivilized and uncultured when we follow our native traditions. So we put all our efforts into mimicking their lifestyles, but instead we end up becoming a hybrid. Wearing kurta over jeans, eating pizza biryani, and working online in British call centers while sitting under the neem tree in our dhoti. Our industrial and economic sectors haven't progressed much despite 73 years of independence. The intellectuals of our country are given scholarships and lucrative incentives to leave their homeland and become cogs in the machines which only serve to make the rich countries richer. Pakistan was formed on the basis of religious harmony and unity, and yet we followed the British system of governance in our country. From the constitution to the roads to the buildings to the railway tracks and the ways that our cities have been designed, all of them echo of the time when the British ruled us. Not only did we create districts and territories, but instead created borders inside our hearts and minds, giving rise to racism. Yes, racism exists in Pakistan and is as real as that in the West. The continuous comparison between the provinces and the people, the constant Lahore versus Karachi biryani debates, the continuous animosity between Pashtun and the Mahajir, and the shaming of Pindi boys and Islamabadi burgers defeats the entire purpose of unity and harmony. Slavery is our legacy, but we can choose to change our future by making a conscious choice to break free from the effects of colonialism that have become a part of our identity. It is time that we become more aware of the world around us and practice kindness in our ways in order to promote racial harmony and social justice.